You know
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. I love these fall days. How many of you saw the Scioto River just now?
A little bit.
Yeah. The steam rising up off the Scioto. Wow. Driving over the bridge, getting close to it. I began to think, is there a fire? No, there's no fire. It's the steam off the river looking gorgeous as ever. Sometimes I forget that October is the reason you should live in Ohio. This is the reason.
Oh, the colors are gorgeous.
And the weather, just, it's perfect. So, today, we are going to spend our time together talking about the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church USA that took place this past summer in Salt Lake City, the changes that were proposed there, so that we are aware of what our larger church is up to. Just as actually, have any of you ever been to General Assembly before? Yeah? Yeah, 4 of you? When it was here in 2000.
How many?
How many have you been to?
No. I've only been to one.
Okay.
Susan's been to them all since.
Susan? Whoa.
I'm exaggerating. Is that clear?
So, Jean, which one did you go to?
Detroit, so 215.
Okay.
In 2015, 2003. I don't even know.
Mm-hmm.
I had the joy and the honor of moderating committee.
Nice.
So it's like,
Okay.
but it's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's absolutely inspirational. It's so many and so many caring people paying attention to so many things that I was clueless about.
Yep.
It really is. It really is a gift to get to go and be present.
All right, well, I'm going to want to hear from all of you who've been, because I've not been. So this is me just recording what I've heard and what I've read. I have spoken to those who were there at Salt Lake, but of course I was not there. So every 2 years, the Presbyterian Church USA, the denomination which we're part of, meets to have a General Assembly and talk about whatever it is we want to talk about, right? And so there are motions made by different presbyteries to change this or that, to take a stance on this or that, to move our money around in this way or that way. And so every 2 years, we argue about those things and then vote, right? People make their pitches the same way that we do at all levels of church government. So just as a very brief reminder, the way Presbyterian government works is, we got a new members class here this morning, and I always describe Presbyterian government as representative democracy. Right? That's what is at the heart of what it means to be. So when you're the member of a Presbyterian church, if you're a member of covenant, you get to vote on which leaders you want to serve as elders and deacons, also on the nominating committee, and then you trust those people to go lead you. Right? That's the form of government. So when it comes to direct democracy, we don't do it all that often. The direct democracy of the congregation is expressed by electing its leaders, and then it's expressed by purchasing land, taking on debt, and I think that's basically it. Like there is not a whole lot we ever ask the congregation to vote on directly, except for its leaders. And of course, our congregation is part of a presbytery. That's a word we probably hear with more regularity around this place. We don't hear probably much about General Assembly, but we do hear about presbytery. Well, presbytery is the 80-some congregations that are as far north as Delaware, Ohio, as far south as the Ohio River, and we are part of the Presbytery of the Scioto Valley. And so later next month, in November, just around the corner, the Presbytery will meet here at Covenant, where representatives, pastors, as well as elders will gather here to vote on the same, whatever it is we want to vote on, right? So whatever piece of business a commission or committee or potentially an individual brings to the floor of the Presbytery and says, I want this to be considered, that will be considered and then voted upon either up or down. So that same level of government takes place on the individual level, takes place on the next one, which is Presbytery. Then there's the next one, which is the Synod. That's your regional body, and we're part of the Synod of the Covenant, which encompasses what? Michigan, Ohio, and parts of Pennsylvania, I believe. And then beyond that is the General Assembly. So, General Assembly meets once every 2 years to do the business of the church. And oftentimes what the General Assembly decides on this or that can feel quite remote from what happens down here on this level. And in that distance between what General Assembly decides and what a congregation thinks, does, believes, or acts upon, there can be a sense of like, well, who is General Assembly anyway, right? Well, what is the General Assembly of the PCUSA? What does it have to do with us? Well, it may be true that there's a gap potentially, and there often is a gap between what the national church decides and what an individual congregation feels, thinks, and believes. But it's important that we recognize that the General Assembly is us, right? All it is elected folks from each level of church government. So let's say you want, as a member of covenant, want to be a part of the General Assembly. How do you do that? Well, you'd ask your session to be representative at Presbyterian. To be a commissioner at Presbyterian. So at this November meeting where I will be officially installed as the moderator of the Presbyterian for 2025, I'm the acting moderator right now because our moderator just resigned. Yeah, you're welcome. I'm frustrated that I'm acting moderator now. I wanted to be next year, but I am now. Honored. It's gonna be good. But you can participate at the Presbyterian level and get to know folks, and they're people just like you, and people different than you, and people from the congregations in our presbytery. And so you get to speak and argue and state your position and vote and all those things if you're a commissioner. Well, our presbytery then has to elect people to the upper levels, right? Specifically to General Assembly. So if you want to be a part of the General Assembly, the way to do that is to get known in the presbytery, get active in the presbytery. There's 4 meetings a year. You can come to any one of them. You can't vote at them unless you're a commissioner, but you can be present at any of them, get to know people, and as you do, then the next time General Assembly comes around, you can throw your name in the basket to be a General Assembly representative. And the way that you become that, you throw your name in, and what has to happen? The presbytery has to vote on you. It's voting at every level, right? So if you get the votes of your presbytery, you can serve as a commissioner. So like I said, every 2 years we do this, and we just had one this past year. I did it, you get this. Over here. This is your very brief summary of what happened at this last meeting. Yeah. Now I wish you could touch these blue bars, because those are hyperlinks. Right? The way that if this were a PDF document, you can click on this, and every one of them will bring you more often than not to an article in the Presbyterian Outlook, which is one of our magazines that covers the news of the PCUSA. So this is an extremely brief summary because over the course of that General Assembly, lots of things happen, lots of business gets done, and this was Presbyterian Outlook's summary of what took place. So you'll note the first thing that they did was vote in a new stated clerk and moderator. I love the stated clerk. When you think of powerful positions that a clergy person might aspire to. I want power in the church, and I want to be well known, and I want influence over my denomination. Well, the highest level that you can really achieve in the Presbyterian Church USA is the stated clerk. Pretty humble title as far as I'm concerned, right? Not bishop, not supreme chancellor, none of those things. Stated clerk, pretty humble job in many ways. Our city clerk had been J. Herbert Nelson, the very first person of color ever elected to the position of stated clerk in the PCUSA, African-American man, and he served, I forget, 4 or 5 years, something like that, and then resigned. And now we just elected Jian Oh, born in South Korea, reared in Kansas, and so she is the first woman of color who is elected to this position. Moderators, unlike stated clerks, serve for just 2 years, right? So it's a temporary position. Stated clerk, you can stay in potentially for many, many years. Moderator, you're there for a couple of years. And there's been this thing now of having co-moderators. That's kind of been, I want to say, a relatively more recent development. And so C.C. Armstrong, a black woman, and Tony Larson, a white man, were elected on the first ballot as our moderators for the next 2 years. I can send around, and I'm happy to send around the PDF of this so you can follow the links and read more about them. I read every one of these articles, and a lot of them I didn't find all that necessarily that interesting. The big hullabaloo is the one on the upper right, sexual orientation, gender identity protections. This was, I think, the most significant piece of business that came out of our General Assembly, primarily because it was the most significant change that is being proposed to our Book of Order. So, Presbyterian Church has 2 parts to its constitution. The first part is the Book of Confessions. This one is much harder to change. If you want to add to the Book of Confessions or take something away, the Presbyterian needs, or the General Assembly needs to vote on it. I forget if it's 75%. I know that if and when a proposal change is made to this, you need, after the vote of the General Assembly, 75% of presbyteries around the country need to affirm that vote. So it's very difficult to change by design, right? Like the Constitution of the United States. It's not just 50% plus 1, right? It's meant to be a high bar to change, and it is. Meanwhile, Book of Order, Part 2 of our Constitution, is easier to change. It's 50% plus 1. Jay?
That's a big book.
Yes.
And I should know this.
Yeah.
What's
in there?
Yeah.
Great questions. Yeah. We can do all kinds of classes on that. So the way I describe the Book of Confessions in our new members class we'll have today is they're the bones. You don't think about your bones that often unless they're broken. They're there, they're operating, but they aren't on the surface, right? It's underneath. So the two, it has the two what we call ecumenical confessions, the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed. These are not Presbyterian confessions of faith. They belong to the larger church. For most every denomination in some form or another recognizes the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed. And then after that, we've got our specific Presbyterian confessions, starting with the Westminster confessions, which were for many, many years, a couple hundred years, the only confessions of the Presbyterian Church. And then in 1983, when the Northern Church, the Presbyterian Church, and the Southern Church came together, it only took 100 years after the Civil War to do that, which is, of course, what actually separated it. But 100 years after the Civil War, plus 20 years, Northern Church, Southern Church comes together, and that was decided, let's have a broader Book of Confessions that's more representative of the larger Reformed Church than just the Presbyterian Church. And so we started adding confessions, including some that are quite recent, like the Confession of Belhar. That's the most recent edition. The Confession of Belhar comes out of apartheid South Africa and addresses issues of racial segregation. So it's wonderful. On all these, by the way, if you search for on your computer Book of Confessions PCUSA, you can download PDFs of it for free. Now we can use hard copies too.
Yeah, I bet there's a copy in the library.
There should be. If there's not, we can get some. Sure. Yeah. Pass it around. So this one's the big one, hard to change. And then the smaller one, the Book of Order, is more, I don't know if muscles is the right analogy or not, but it's more readily relevant to what we do day to day, week to week. Book of Confessions isn't going to tell a congregation how to elect a session. That's not what it's there for. It's there to express fundamentals of our faith. But how do we elect? How does a congregation elect a session? That's what this is for, right? How does a congregation conduct a wedding or a pastor conduct a wedding? That's all in here. And so much more practical matters of the church. So the big one that got changed, or is being proposed to be changed, comes in F104003, Unity in Diversity. I love this part of our Book of Order. The unity of believers in Christ is reflected in the rich diversity of the church's membership. In Christ, by the power of the Spirit, God unites persons through baptism, regardless of race, ethnicity, age, sex, disability, geography, or theological conviction. There is therefore no place in the life of the church for discrimination against any person. Presbyterian Church USA shall guarantee full participation and representation in its worship, governance, and emerging life to all persons or groups within its membership. No member shall be denied participation or representation for any reason other than the stated in this Constitution. Now, as I read that list of categories by which people will not be denied membership, did anything stick out to you as particularly unique?
Can you read it again, that list?
By the power of the Spirit, God unites persons through baptism regardless of race, ethnicity, age, sex, disability, geography, or theological conviction.
And that last one is where it's been a lot.
Yes. I can't tell you how many pastors are not aware of that last one. And they're shocked, if not scandalized by it.
So somebody could join the church to cause trouble.
That's one way to look at it, I suppose. But that's one. Yeah. I think what it's meant to say is we embrace a widely diverse theology.
Yeah.
And there are bars to membership. There are these 4 membership questions. But outside of asking those questions, we are not to say you're allowed to come or you're not allowed to come. So if any church wants to say, here's our 4 membership questions, and we're going to add to that our particular understanding of the Bible's interpretation of anything, marriage, gender identity. But it doesn't matter what the hot topic is, right? Those are hot topics right now. But it could be hot topics anytime. You are not allowed to add to that. So theological diversity is at the heart of what we believe to be what this church is about. I think it's quite radical. And by the way, I love it. I love it. I love that there is a deep statement of faith that says we will not bar based on theological conviction, because we trust the Spirit is gathering to this church exactly those whom the Spirit is calling. So a pretty broad statement already. Now, what is being proposed and added to that under that section is, as you'll notice on your sheet, commissioners approved a 2-part inclusivity change to the Book of Order, adding gender identity and sexual orientation to the list of the rich diversity reflected in the church membership. So that whole list now is being proposed to add 2 more recognized categories: gender identity and sexual orientation. We shall not discriminate in membership based on either one of those categories. And then a second addition is being proposed, which is that when someone is being brought forth to be a pastor and being examined whether or not this person should be ordained into the pastorate, we have proposed to add that could determine a candidate's ability and commitment to fulfill all the requirements as expressed in the constitutional questions for ordination and installation. And so what this second part is hard to understand. It's pointing out very specifically that in candidates' ordination, we need to actually consider the part that is read to you. That part must be considered and honored in their examination. Now, those who didn't like these changes said very clearly, it's already implied. Because if you're being ordained as a pastor, you're being ordained to the support of this entire Book of Order. Why do we need to point out something specific about theological diversity, sexual orientation, gender identity, if the person who's being ordained already has to submit to the full teaching of this? Well, those on the inclusion side said yes, but we have a unique problem about this issue. So we need to highlight that. So this was the big changes that were called for, and it did pass. I'll note that it wasn't overwhelming. The amendment was adopted by a vote of 216 in favor and 192 opposed. Wow. Look at that. You know what that is? That's theological diversity right there, folks. And what it shows to me is that there's a narrative and there's some truth to it, that the PCUSA is becoming a more and more progressive denomination over the past whatever decades you want to put, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, any number, whatever decades you want to put on it. I think that's true. that the church is getting a bit more bolder and progressive in its stance, not least towards the LGBTQIA plus community, amongst other stances. But it's not uniform. That's nearly 50, right? What is it? 50, I mean, I'm not good at math. 55, 45? It's close, right? And so what that shows to me, particularly for minority voices in our denomination, who I think more and more are feeling as though they have no voice, you're not as far away as you think you are. And while my personal convictions are more on the progressive side, they are, hide that from people. I want our conservative friends in our denomination to know you're still a part of this thing. You're right there. And the goal is not to eliminate you. The goal is not to finally get rid of our theological diversity so we can finally have a reign of unfettered progressive theology and politics. No, that is against exactly the statements in our Book of Order. So I might be highlighting that might be depressing to you to find that it was that close, but I bring it up to say this is where the church is, right? And there is a great theological diversity. Now, I want to take some questions, but so we know exactly where we are. These are the two changes that were proposed and approved, though close, but they were approved. Now what needs to happen is in order for this Book of Order to actually be changed, those votes are going to go to our presbyteries, including ours, starting next month in November. So we will probably, I don't know if this one will be up for vote, it probably will be. There are enough changes that we might spread it out over the November meeting and the February one, so we don't have to deal with too much business in one meeting. But I'm guessing this vote will come up in our presbytery next month here at Covenant. And then those who have voting privileges will get to decide and we affirm this or not. And then when that happens, you need 50% plus one of the presbyteries across the country to affirm these changes. If and when they are affirmed, then it becomes the new Book of Order.
Are the votes hidden or they're open where people raise that just as a matter of interest?
At GA, I believe it's done electronically. Here, it will be done, what we've been doing since we've had hybrid meetings is, because you got some people on Zoom, some people in person, we have construction paper. So if you're here in person, you vote with, if you're affirming, you pick up a green piece of paper. If you have a deny, it's a red piece of paper. And then people vote on Zoom as well. Because we follow Robert's rules, I know there's a provision by which folks can ask for write-in. It has not happened since we've gone hybrid, because that'd be a real pain. I don't even know. I guess Zoom is technically already kind of write-in. Yeah. The only person who's seeing the votes is the city clerk. Yeah. And Karen, you had a
I was
question.
just wondering if this does pass, is it going to be another time when some congregations leave the church?
I imagine that will, and that certainly has been. So, those who voted against 196, many of them said on a personal level and on a congregational level, we do not discriminate on this, but I don't want to get another reason for folks to leave the church. So that was a stated position of those who were opposed to these changes. There is a section, a very kind of famous Presbyterian section in our Book of Order, it's probably right here, on freedom of the conscience, which really goes back to Presbyterian founding, right? So after the Reformation starts to take hold in the British Isles, you have, of course, the Anglican Church, the Church of England, separating from the Roman Catholic Church and coming up with its own prayer book. The Book of Common Prayer is primarily written by Thomas Cranmer. As that book was then pushed out across the British Isles, there were some, particularly in the northern parts of England, known as Scotland, who had no interest in being told how to pray by the Queen of England. And so there's a famous, probably apocryphal story of when this book was instituted in a church in Scotland. A woman in the worship service, they weren't in pews, they were in chairs, picked up her chair and threw it across the sanctuary. She would not be bound by what the Queen told her to pray. So that kind of understanding of you don't get to tell me what I believe, you don't get to tell me how I should pray, has been expressed theologically as God alone is Lord of the conscience. So we should not put unnecessary burdens on people's theological convictions. And so those who are against these changes are saying exactly that. You are afflicting my conscience by asking me to vote on this. While I can understand that position, I also think that why can't an individual be a part of the church and say, though I have a personal conviction in this way, I am choosing to be a part of this larger body. And as a result of that, I'm going to participate in this larger body, regardless of my individual conviction. But, same argument applies, I guess, to a lot of issues around inclusion in our culture. At what point does some folks' recognition and expansion of rights begin to afflict the conscience of other folks who don't share that? Very, very open question.
Well, when I come to church, I live off of Bethel Road, I come right past Reading Bethel. I come right past Bethel Church now. It's no longer Bethel Presbyterian.
Yeah.
And I just think about that and how many churches we lost.
Mm-hmm.
And would that cause something as radical as that?
It's hard to say, I think
Previous.
I'm sure there will be. There are small churches right now trying to disaffiliate in our Presbyterian. The ones I'm aware of are like 10 people on the rolls. It doesn't make them neat, but it's not like there's some mass exodus that I'm aware of. I also don't think, all I know really is this Presbyterian. I do not think this change is going to bring about a mass exodus within our Presbyterian. I don't think so. I'll be shocked. Because I think at this point, all that energy was spent 10 years ago. It was spent when the Supreme Court changed things, and it was spent when the PCOSA Council changed things around marriage at that time. So, all right, yes, I guess there can be a straw that broke the camel's back. I think the camel's back was broken 10 years ago.
It's just not reminded of that.
No,
Every
no,
time I come to
yeah.
church.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I remember when I was growing up, the GA supported Angela Davis.
Yes.
And it was a huge thing because it was that break. And so in my young mind, I somehow always thought GA was more progressive than the individual
Yes.
churches. Is that?
I mean, I don't know enough about it. So those of you who know more, can speak more. I think that perception is, I think, the broader perception, but that also probably depends on the theological tone and tenor of your individual congregation and your presbytery. So if you're in a presbytery that is largely moderate to conservative, that perception would reign supreme. If you're in a presbytery that is, out there leading the charge on issues of progress and inclusion, you're going to say GA is regressive. So it's going to depend on your individual perspective. I do think that perception, but I also have perceived this presbytery as pretty moderate. We are not one who's been leading the charge on inclusion. We're following along, but we're not leading the charge by any stretch, and never have been. So I think that perception holds in this presbytery. Those of you who've been there more? Yeah. And I didn't catch your name.
My name is Susan Meyer.
Susan, tell us, you've been.
Yeah, I've been to, I think, every General Assembly since 1977.
Wow.
Except for one.
So
We are General Assembly. I mean, Joel started by saying, we are the ones who are elected by churches, by presbyteries to go and gather. And what happens is that those who are elected have to study, have to talk, have to listen, have to discern on a particular issue, have to talk and argue. And so it seems like, after listening and talking and arguing for hours, that there comes to a point where after praying together for 3 or 4 days constantly, you do get to the point where you think, oh, well, my mind has changed by the movement of the Spirit. So one does get to the point where you say, wow, my mind has been influenced by the presence of God. I'm different than I was. But it's us. I mean, it's ordinary people. It's not some staff person who's influenced. You know, it's you listen to missionaries, you listen to people who have actually been in situations. So yeah, we're changed. We're changed. That's what my experience has been at least. And I guess my question for Jewel is I guess I'm a little confused about the second part of this thing. Is what about the second part is gets people upset.
Yeah, well, like I said, I know some of my colleagues are shocked to find out that the book of order they were ordained under and said that they agreed with it. They don't know that even theological conviction has been there for a long time. So they think, wait a minute, I thought, that seems unreasonable. I thought we know what our theology is and we all agree upon it. So there's an ignorance potentially even in those who should know very, very well, much less ruling elders who weren't going to 3 years of graduate school for this stuff. So in the absence of that kind of literacy of our own polity, they learn that, and now you want to add these two other controversial categories, controversial for many, not for me, but for many categories. They'd rather not have it, they'd rather be able to say that is a part of the book of order that I recognize is there, but I am not personally in favor of, so don't bring it up at my ordination. I can be ordained to this book of order, but I don't want to be particularly have you highlight that part at my ordination, and that's what they're uncomfortable with. They'd rather have the historically, general question of will you be governed by this church's polity, right? Which has always been the question. Well, that implies the entire book of order. But now we're changing that and not just saying that. We're saying will you honor these interuniversity section? And for those who don't agree with sexual orientation and gender identity as they want to be able to, again, I don't want to mischaracterize, but they do want to be able to discriminate against those categories.
So this gets added to the questions at ordination,
Correct.
not at ordination exams.
Yes, at ordination, correct.
In front
In front of the presbytery. Yes.
So, but at ordination.
At the examination. So whenever a candidate is brought forward to a presbytery, the presbytery has to examine that candidate on the floor of the presbytery and then vote on whether or not they think this person should be ordained or not. And that's the final vote. The covenant never voted on me to be ordained. You can vote on me to be installed, but I was ordained by the presbytery of the Southern Valley. So that is what is being added, is that at a candidate's ordination, examination on the floor of presbytery, they need to be inquired about this section of the book of order.
I mean, the presbyteries always have the right to ask whatever questions they want.
That's right.
Sometimes they ask nothing, and
That's right.
sometimes they ask a lot.
Yeah. And our presbytery is pretty light these days because I think the battles are mostly again fought 10 years ago, so there's not a whole lot of controversy right now. That doesn't mean that people are unified in conviction. They're not. I know that some of our GA commissioners from our presbytery this past year were not in favor of these changes because personally they're not there on orientation, gender identity. And I've seen for our presbytery, I think does a really good job of trying to elect diverse commissioners. So we look for folks who aren't of one mind. And what I've seen happen with some of our commissioners since I've been here is some of them go and have a transformative experience. They go, wow, this church is, I kind of thought GA was out there doing its own thing. And now there's an opening to the larger church. And others I've seen the exact opposite. They go and they're disillusioned. They can't believe how crazy and progressive this church is, and I have no idea, and they're turned off. Both happen.
And we give room for both.
That's right.
We truly do. We really truly do. It is, you go not as a representative of 25 people saying yes, and
That's right.
14 people saying no. You go with your own mind and your own guidance and your own prayer.
And that's what freedom of conscience means, in my opinion. That's what I think freedom of conscience means at all levels of church government. Meaning, if you are elected to session of this church, you can have folks, friends, people that you're connected with, and they can say, you know, Beth, we need you to vote this way, and you go represent us. You can represent people because you're connected with people and you know what the congregation thinks, but in the end, it is between you and God as to how you vote, and that's what freedom of conscience is. That you are not bound by this commission, this committee, this group of people. Each person who votes gets to do so before God with a free conscience, not bound by their commitments or loyalties to anyone else except for the Lord. That's what freedom of conscience means. And in my opinion, that still holds for those who disagree with these changes. So you either then decide to vote no for the candidate, which you can do. I understand that might bring social pressure on you and you don't like the way that feels. Fine, how deep is this conviction? Is it yours or not? Or you come up with a way in your mind and say, look, like I said, whether I personally agree with this person's gender identity or sexual orientation, I am choosing to be part of this larger church body. And so, yes, I can personally disagree, but that doesn't mean that I corporately will deny it. Which people do on all kinds of issues, right? All the time. So that was the big hot button.
Are we voting separately on these two though, or is this one?
I believe, well, that's a good question. Good question. I don't remember the answer to that. I'll have to find out. I think they probably are voted on separately because they're two changes.
Yeah.
Other big highlights, worthy of note. Fossil fuels is an interesting one. This is one that's been coming around every couple of years. Because Presbyterian Church, as a larger body, particularly the Presbyterian Foundation and the Board of Pensions, these are like five governing bodies, or governing bodies, there are five branches. I forget what the word is in PCUSA. Two of them got a lot of money. One of them is the Board of Pensions, the other is the Presbyterian Foundation. And within that money, you invest that money. And what do you do with investing that money? And there has been, for many, many years now, a list of companies, corporations, countries, even, well, that's actually a new change, countries that we say don't invest there because it does not align with our beliefs. And so sometimes that has to do with gun manufacturers or weapons manufacturers or, I don't know,
Oil.
oil. Well, that's the question now. And we have not largely.
We're still doing that. We've been doing
Yes.
that one for a long time.
Yeah.
Caterpillar, that was another one.
That's right. And so what happened, this is an interesting one, if you read about it, they voted initially to divest entirely from fossil fuels. This was one day of GA. The next day, someone said, oh, here's what you missed in that vote. And made a case that this vote contradicts other already previously held positions, and then leaves some of our investors in an impossible situation. So the GA reconsidered it and unvoted what they had voted the day before, reversed its decision, disapproving ENV02 and approving ENV06. So ENV02 was this directive that said divest entirely from all fossil fuels. And then the next day, someone came along who's, I can read all about it, and really qualified to say, here's why that was a mistake. And let's do this one instead, ENV06, which directs further engagement with greenhouse gas emitters and the fossil fuel industry. So there's this theory of the case, believe it or not, that our money that we have in these fields is large enough, influential enough, that we can actually influence what some of the decisions are made by these companies. And by divesting entirely, we lose that influence. We lose our seat at the table because we've left. Now, I'm sure the climate justice folks would say that's like, you are fooling yourself about your influence. Well, whatever. But there you go. What do we see here? I think you can see our church is not of one mind, and we're not just pushing forward on every possible thing that we can. maybe change our minds about things even in the course of a single General Assembly. Backside, divestment from occupier countries. This was big. GA unanimously adopted a commissioner's resolution asking the Presbyterian Foundation Board of Pensions, remember I told you that they have lots of money, to prayerfully consider ending their investments in government debt from countries engaged in prolonged military occupations currently defined by the UN as Israel or Iraq. So, and when I read that initially, I thought prayerfully consider sounds awfully suggestive. The way that I'm reading about it, large, is that this is more than just a suggestion, and there will actually be action here, where they will not invest in bonds, particularly from these nations, not buying up their debt. That's a big deal, right? And quite controversial, particularly on the issue of Israel, which is a controversial hot topic in the world writ large, in the American church, and certainly in the Peace USA. Protecting children from gun violence. I wanted to mention that one because I found this one very, very interesting. An overture calling for actions that children can live free from gun violence passed easily in committee, but was removed from the consent agenda, so the entire General Assembly could hear testimony about it, and they did. And following heart-wrenching testimonies, Tony Larson spoke and said the stories are important, but they are hard. So this passed unanimously. Now, what I found fascinating about this is specifically what they passed. What were the resolutions? 7 concrete steps, including prayer, gun safety storage, ending gun marketing to children, promoting gun security technology, and voting, and calls for our congregations to take some specific action of love and responsibility for children as part of the movement to prevent gun violence. It says nothing about assault weapons. It says nothing about the hot topics of like bump stocks. If you're engaged in the issue, you're like, so in many ways, it's a pretty, not meaningless. I actually think, and I think this was their points, if we actually took these steps, the number of children who would die would be brought down dramatically. So they heard testimony from families whose children got access to a loose gun in the house and were playing with it and shot and killed their best friend. These types of things where if the guns were safely secured and stored, that child would be alive today. So what I found is an interesting one. Is it was adopted, the testimony was heart-wrenching, but in terms of the teeth of it, I think it's pretty non-controversial, or at least I hope it is. I wish that it is. Who is against gun safety? But I guess we also might be surprised. Might be surprised.
No guns. You didn't take the big step up. No guns.
Yeah, or taking guns away, or recommending assault weapons ban, or any of those. Yeah, none of those. So, what you get? I thought it was interesting, and the testimony was, as I read about it, heartbreaking, powerful. But the actual steps, pretty banal in some ways, or at least pretty non-controversial. Let's try that. Last one I wanted to point out was the rejection of Christian Zionism. I've got a couple of art. I did print off at least one of those, maybe a couple more. I'll just leave these. If you're interested in these articles, some of these are on a variety of these issues. About Christian Zionism, who knows what that is? Give us a brief. All right, go ahead, Bob. Tell us what Christian Zionism is.
Oh, great. Well, it's a movement, basically in the United States, that this is prophetic. This is going to happen. Before the end times come, Jews have to be in Israel, and Israel is biblically and historically due the land that they're in, and there'll be a war. Christians will take over Israel, and the Jews will have a certain time period to be converted to Christianity. So, but it's a sort of a crazy theology, pro-Israel, support of Israel from a very strange perspective.
Yeah, it's a very good summary, Bob. So it's over the course of the last 2,000 years, this is an extremely unique theological development that has taken place over the last 100 years in our country specifically, which is the conflation, the assumed identity between the nation of Israel as we read about them in the scriptures and the political nation state of Israel today. That these are the same things. And then added to that is some very strange thoughts about the end of time and a certain reading of the book of Revelation where all of these things are going to take place. And it looks in the current moment as though it is unbridled support for the nation of Israel as it stands today. But if you keep reading, they think and believe that as Israel, whatever, and fulfills its prophecy, I forget in the readings, a third or 2/3 of these Jews will be killed by Christians. So is it pro-Israel? Is it anti-Semitic? It's very confusing. But from what it looks like in the current moment is unbridled support for the nation of Israel. And so there are plenty of Jewish groups in our country who are welcoming that support. They're welcoming this Christian Zionism narrative because right now it looks like a blank check for Israel to do whatever Israel wants to do to those in Gaza, those in the West Bank. And so on this Christian nationalism renunciation of it that took place, you did have a Jewish rabbi stand up and say, you should not pass this. And the article that I have there says why. Here's why you should not pass it, because you're just adding fuel to the anti-Semitic fire that exists in the world. You're just further tarnishing the reputation of Presbyterian Church USA, and it's anti-Semitic. Please don't pass this. Well, it passed. And part of the reason it passed is because we have very deep historic relationships with Palestinian Christians in that area who are begging us to help. And one of them was here last month. Right? Zagby, who's here speaking for those of you who have to hear him. And so, like everything else around modern day Israeli politics, people get really, really heated, and there's not a lot of listening, and there's a lot of accusations thrown. Right? And so that was one thing when Zagby was here last month. I asked him about, if we stand with you, we know that we will be called anti-Semitic. So what's going to happen? And I forget exactly how he responded, but it was like, welcome to the club. We are not anti-Semitic. What we are against is the destruction of certain people groups, the perpetual discrimination against them. So that was a significant action that was taken as well. So you can read about more. I've got more of these articles up here. But yeah, I hope, wouldn't it be cool if some of us showed up next month at our Presbyterian meeting here at Covenant and both maybe got to see the action of Presbyterian for some of you maybe for the first time, and then see how we vote on some of these changes around the book of Mormon.
And get to see you installed.
And get to see me installed as moderator, officially.
What day is that? What day?
That is November, let's see, 19th, right? Why don't I have it on my phone?
I'm trying to avoid that installation. I know.
It has to be November, no, it is, yeah, it is. November 19th, which is a Tuesday, and the service will start at like 3 o'clock. So I'll probably be installed between the hours of 3 and 4.
Is that the whole program?
No. One thing I'm looking forward to as moderator is I'm going to keep meetings going, one way or another. Even if they are long, they at least will be efficient. If we're here, let us, be doing our business efficiently.
Is it a multi-day event?
No.
Just one day?
Yeah.
One day, that 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, so it'll probably go from start at 3 and go till 6 or 7.
No dinner?
There may be a pause, but no.
You're
Onward.
all welcome to come and help set up.
Yep.
And feed and nourish. So.
Yeah.
Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this church body, for being a part of something larger than ourselves, that we are not on our own here at Covenant, making it up as we go, but we're connected to congregations across this state, across this country, and across the world. And we want to be a part of your larger body, and we thank you for calling us to relationship. And so as we, as a congregation, as a presbytery, consider how it is we want to vote and participate and support the larger church body, give us wisdom and discernment on how to do that well, and guide our consciences, guide the consciences of all those who will be voting here in November, that we might respect and honor each other, not in spite of our differences, but with them and celebrate them. Lord, may it be. Amen.